All right, up next, Chris Peters, friend of the show, hashtag friend of the show, of ESPN, joining us right now to talk NHL Draft and prospects. Chris, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. Always good to be with you.
Absolutely. So first of all, I mean, I'm just glad that you and yours are okay following the Derecho that hit a few weeks ago, because we had that experience a couple months ago here in Nashville, and it became like the meteorological word of the year, it seems. How weird to have two big things like that happen in the span of a year for the U.S.
I know, it's wild. I mean, like, I'd never heard of it. And, yeah, we had, I'm just south of Cedar Rapids, and luckily for us, we didn't get it as bad as they did. And, the Cedar Rapids Rough Riders in the USHL, their arena, got ripped up a bit by the storm. And, they said that they had, winds up to upwards of 140 miles an hour, which, I mean, is like Category 4 hurricane, essentially, without the storm surge with water. So thankfully there wasn't any water, because that would have made things a lot worse. But, yeah, I mean, it was tough going. It's going to be a long road back for a lot of people throughout Iowa and parts of Nebraska and even Illinois. So, luckily we're fine, and hoping we have brighter days ahead, because 2020 keeps hitting us pretty hard.
Yeah, and it still is trying to get used to that the draft is going to be in mid-October. Just thinking about that, and especially because that's when we're starting to see, college seasons potentially starting. Some of them are still going to go, and then what we see, junior hockey as well, still potentially, we're all hoping obviously is going to go. So when we're looking at this with kids having to wait this long for the draft, overall, just how is this affecting preparation for the draft for those kids that are draft eligible right now, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's certainly not ideal, and I mean it's also the fact that you're limited with what you're able to do, skating and trying to stay ready and stay in shape and stay, not everybody's got a home gym, not everybody, there are a lot of hurdles that I think these players have to overcome, and so that's a mental grind on its own, and then the fact that whenever the season does return, it'll be a much longer off season than we had, and certainly for some of these guys that they missed out on last impressions at the CHL playoffs and the World Under-18 Championship and the draft combine and things like that, where these kind of events where they can be separating factors for a variety of reasons, and it's hard on the players, it's hard on the teams. I think some of the players have made the decision, or at least Alexis Lafreniere, the number one projected pick for this year, has said that he will not play in the QMJHL. He won't go to Europe, so he's hoping that he can, jump right into the NHL and be ready for that. But most other players will be playing. The guys in Europe are already starting their season. The SHL is in preseason right now in Sweden. The KHL had their opener today. So those guys are full go, and they're hoping that maybe they'll be able to make a lasting, good impression. But that's a tough decision for scouts to say, how much do we put into the beginning of this season in this unique situation, and how much do we rely on what we saw that, is now months old video footage, and things can change over the course of those months.
And Chris, drilling down, kind of looking into players that might be available at 11th, Jack Quinn's name has floated around quite a bit as a possible pick for Nashville. He's one of two players who scored at least 50 goals in the OHL this season. Having seen the questionable inconsistency that the Nashville organization lately has seen, hypothetically speaking, if that scenario presented itself and he were to join this organization, further down the line, what do you think he'd be bringing to this team?
Goals. I mean, I think this kid's a natural scorer. I think he's got a great shot. One of the best shots in the draft this year. I think one thing that he really improved this season that I thought popped more was, just his hands, his skill, his ability to create a little bit more on his own. He's got a good, he's not a big guy, but he's got a good sturdy frame. He gets to the middle of the ice extremely well at the junior level. He's going to have to bulk up and get ready for that at the NHL level. It's a lot different getting to the middle there. But, we see a lot of these guys that can rack up goals in junior, and they're scoring from, the perimeter. They're scoring, so you have concerns about that when you see that. That's not really a concern with Jack Quinn. He can score at the net front. He can score from distance, and so he has that ability. So I think that, he made a real late push over the course of the season, of what was left of it. He, the Eastern Conference in the OHL, which Ottawa plays in, is not necessarily the strongest. I think that there's a very big discrepancy between the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference, at least presently. And so it wasn't surprising to see him put up big numbers, but I think that the way that he scored is really what's important. And that's a guy, in my most recent mock draft, that's who I have going to Nashville. I think that there's a good chance he will be available there. But I know that there are at least some people that think he could go in the top 10, possibly even ahead of teammate Marco Rossi, which would be very interesting, seeing as he was leading scorer in the OHL this season, points-wise. So a lot of different things come into play, but he's certainly intriguing.
And Dawson Mercer is another name that's kind of buzzing around Nashville, about the same size as Quinn, versatile center who's easily able to jump on the wing. Whether or not this ends up being a pick for Nashville, where do you see his game heading, and what is he likely to bring to any organization that he lands in?
Yeah, he's such a versatile player. He has a great work ethic, great motor, good speed. I think that's important. He plays the game at a fast pace. He made Canada's junior team as more of a depth guy, kind of a fourth-line player, but, in the QMJHL, he's a top six forward. He gives you some good defensive value. I think he can play wing. He can play center. He's got a good hockey sense, good vision. I think the thing that really stands out to me is just his ability to make decisions and the pace at which he's able to make those decisions. Because, to play fast, you can't just skate fast. You have to think the game very fast. And I think that's one of the things that he does. And, he seems kind of like a Nashville-style player. I think he would fit in well there because it's a push the pace, kind of get after you a bit. I think if Peter Laviolette was still around, he probably would be salivating over a guy like that. But I mean, certainly John Hines loves guys that have that work ethic that Dawson Mercer possesses as well.
And Chris Peters, ESPN, join us here on Penalty Box Radio. And Chris, looking throughout this, I mean, it's a fairly deep draft, what we're seeing. It's good for the Predators, just keeping it real here at home, with keeping their first-round pick, 2 seconds, 2/3. But are there any players out there that stand out to you that would not be a good fit for the Nashville Predators that you think it'd be really risky for them to pick this guy if he's available at number 11?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be interesting to kind of see what's available. Like the fact of the matter is that the consensus really drops off after one. Mm-hmm. So we don't know, how the rest of the order is going to go. I think most of us assume that Quentin Byfield and Tim Stützle are going to go in the second and third picks in whatever order potentially. And then after that, it gets a little bit more difficult to kind of see. But I think, one of the things I mentioned about, with Jack Quinn is, his ability to get to the middle of the ice. I think one of the guys that could be available in that range, he would have to slip a little bit, is Alexander Holtz. Like, I see him, and it's hard for me to, even though I see him in a Swedish jersey and, they're beautiful gold jerseys, it's hard for me to see him in a Nashville Predators jersey. But he has good size. He can shoot. He can play, but I think he's a little bit too on the perimeter at times. And I'd like to see him get more aggressive, more physical. I think that he'd be a guy that could potentially try a coach's patience at times. I still think he's an immense talent, and his goal scoring ability certainly has him high on my list still. But I think that would be an interesting kind of decision there. I think the need for a quality center. You say Anton Lundell is another player that could be there. He's more of a two-way center. He's not exactly, he doesn't have a lot of flash, doesn't have a lot of kind of excitement in terms of skill, but he's a very effective, efficient player. Like, I think that would be a safe pick in that range, but not necessarily the most impactful pick that you could make there. So those are guys that are, I would not fault them for picking those players. It's just for, I think a lot of people have seen kind of what the Predators have right now, and they want that dynamic scoring talent. They want somebody that can really change the game offensively. I think that those guys don't necessarily do that enough. But say you get lucky and a Marco Rossi falls, or Jack Quinn is available, or by some act of God, Cole Perfetti is there. Those are things that kind of would make you a little bit more excited. But I mean, the good news is that Philip Tomasino's on the way too. So, and that's a dynamic player. I think he'll be a guy that's worth getting excited about. And I also think, it wouldn't make a ton of sense for Nashville if, let's say, Jamie Drysdale, Jake Sanderson, I don't think they would fall that far. But, I don't think that a defenseman is necessarily the play given the depth of talent at forward right now.
Well, that would make plenty of Nashville fans roll their eyes if it was another defenseman. Even if they are still a really good pick, it'd still make them roll their eyes here in Nashville. So before we have to let you go, you had an article come about the Tampa Bay Lightning and building a perennial contender, and a huge chunk of this article is on homegrown talent. And obviously we see how important the draft is in drafting and finding talent, not obviously in the first round, but in later rounds or even in the second and third round. We see a lot of that with the Tampa Bay Lightning, and it just shows how it takes time to build a contender. So we'll put your general manager hat on as well and say, over the course of a couple years, what do you think is most important in terms of drafting if you're trying to build a contender for years down the road? What types of players do you think are important for a team to have, knowing that, hey, they're not going to make an impact immediately, but we know that in 3-4 years they could be the core of this team?
Yeah, well, I think, one of the things that really stood out to me about Tampa is the mid-round hits that you have. And Tampa's first-round drafting, not great, honestly. I mean, outside of Victor Hedman and Steven Stamkos, who predated Steve Yzerman, they did not have very many first-round draft picks, with the exception of Andrei Vasilevsky, that are still with the team. They were either traded or they didn't really pan out there. So you look at guys like a Braden Point, and Braden Point is one of those players that now is a star, but was not perceived that would what he would be, a good middle six forward. Same with Anthony Cirelli. You need players like that are good two-way players, guys that might be undervalued at the draft, that might not have had impeccable numbers in junior or had some deficiency, whether it be size or that maybe there was a hitch in their skating or anything like that. Those are the types of players that you can get value for in mid-round situations. Now, you have to be a little bit lucky, obviously, to get those players. Andre Palat, for instance, is a 7th-round draft pick. Tyler Johnson and Yanni Gourde were undrafted players, and the Predators have been somewhat aggressive on the college free agent market, but they haven't landed the big fish typically in terms of guys that college and junior free agents. They have had some good picks in the draft over time. Obviously, they're very good at drafting defensemen, and maybe less so at forward. But I think of Phil Tomasino as kind of one of those guys that's a future core player who will be able to kind of be one of those types where you maybe like a Braden Point type where I don't know, I don't want to project him out, like that's not really a great comp for him in terms of what he can be, but just in terms of impact. If you get that out of him, you're obviously thrilled. And then just the amount of money that they have spent, kind of keeping their guys. There's the tax advantages, which are obviously really helpful for teams in those states. And if I'm not mistaken, Tennessee is one of them, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So so that helps. And then it's the thing that was fascinating to me is they had all that homegrown talent. Their top 6 is entirely drafted or signed as a free agent by Tampa. And then their decor is almost built entirely through free agency, where it was just kind of, bargains like Kevin Shattenkirk. So you have to get a little bit lucky on that end too. The right guys come available at the right times, and they want to be part of what you have going there. So, it's hard to be specific because I think every draft year changes, but, we get enamored with always wanting to take the big swings in the draft and drafting stars, and I think that's good. But there are ways to find NHL talent in drafts. It's just you can't go through drafts and not land like an NHL player in a draft. It kills you down the line, and you need players that are going to play on entry-level contracts early, like Anthony Cirelli is, and like a traded player like Mikhail Sergachev, who they traded Jonathan Drouin, who was the number 3 overall pick. Let's imagine Seth Jones in Tampa at this point. Like if that would make a lot of people sick if it was Hedman and Jones on that blue line right now. But yeah, it's kind of amazing how things work out over time. But yeah, I think that Nashville in general has built a pretty good thing, and there's something there. Now you just have to kind of figure out what are the pieces that we can do to improve this, and there are certainly guys that you need to put them over the top as well.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, as always, we appreciate your insight. Always love having you on the show, man, so really appreciate you coming on.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.